Yes. Well, my father worked for the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, and he, as a young man, was posted to Manila. And the war arrived in Manila, and in 1942, January 42, and the bank took the decision that some employees of the bank wanted to sign up. And the bank took the decision that the married employees should stay, and the bachelors could go and sign up. So he was married and stayed in Manila. We were then overtaken by the war. The war arrived, and we were interned in the camp. A little word about the site of the camp. The camp was set in, it's called Santo Tomas Internment Camp, and it is Asia's oldest university. They've just celebrated 400 years of university. And it was decided that the campus for the camp would be the camp. And so there we were. That's all I have to say really as an introduction. But strangely, I heard quite recently that the site of the camp was chosen by the American senior people in Manila. They decided where the camp should be before the Japanese even arrived. And when the Japanese said, we're going to incarcerate thousands of you, they said, well, why don't you put us in Santo Tomas? So it was sort of self-inflicted, but rather a good location.
Now that sets the scene. What do you recollect? Because Judy, you were born in 1937, weren't you, in Hong Kong?
I was born in 1937 in Hong Kong, and my parents' names were George and Joy Stewart, and they had been married in Hong Kong Cathedral in 1936. So we then went on leave, and then back to Manila after, as Jim explained just now. And then, of course, the war started, and I have very little remembrance of the actual beginning of it, but I do remember my parents saying that we all had to attend the Manila Club, I think it was, at a certain time, with a suitcase each, and that's all my parents were able to carry. As Jim was only a baby, and my mother had to carry him, they were very limited with what they could take in. So we set forth, and from the Manila Club, I think we all got into lorries and were sent to the camp, and that's my vague memory of arriving there.
Okay, so you arrived in the camp, and what happened next?
I think this is not from memory. This is from all the research we've done. There are many books about this camp.
Yes.
In the early days, things could be brought into the camp. So either your houseboy or colleagues from outside, people who were not interned, could bring things to you. While you couldn't leave the camp, they could bring things into the camp, and you lined up. And this is in some of the pictures we have. And people would bring in beds and mattresses and all sorts of curious things, and food, of course. And in the early days, I think you could get most things, and you could even buy things through the wire from outside. So I think I think nobody realized that we were going to be inside for so long.
Yes, I think the whole feeling was that, we're going to be away for a couple of months. So a suitcase load would be fine. But initially, all the wives and the children were put into rooms in the main building, and the men and boys over 14 were put in a separate annex.
They're in the gym.
In the gym, wasn't it?
Gymnasium.
The gymnasium of the university. And I think we were in room number 67, as far as I remember. And we had a very small portion of the room. I mean, we were in with many other wives and children, so it must have been absolute chaos. But that's where we stayed for quite a time. And then gradually the men were able to build shacks for the families. And as a shack...
Called shanties.
Oh, shanties, sorry, yes, shanties. And then we moved out to one, and we had the wonderful address of, I think it was 3 Garden Road.
Garden Road, yes.
Garden Road.
And these shanties were made of nipa palms.
Palms, yes.
Just in the local fashion, with bamboo uprights and sloping nipa roofs.
Yes,
and
yes.
Altogether very comfortable.
But one of the stipulations that I seem to remember that the Japanese insisted on was that they should be able to see through. So the side, the windows had to open up, and they were just gaps. There was no glass or anything. So if the Japs were passing, they were able to see through and see what was going on, really. But that was our home for probably nearly 3 years, I think, wasn't it?
Well, a lot of the time, yes.
Most of the time,
Although
yes.
in the records it does show that often the children went back to the main building to sleep.
Yes.
I've just been rereading my father's diary of the period, and it changed
Yes.
according to how officious the Japanese were from time to time.
And it was towards when there was bombing around us, wasn't it, towards the end?
Towards the end,
I think the parents thought it was safer, probably.
They got very jumpy towards the end, yes.
Yeah, and they had friends who were in the main building that we presumably went and stayed with.
Yes.
But, I mean, I remember a school being set up. I was, 5, and must have had my first few lessons there, because everybody was interned. There were teachers, nurses, doctors,
missionaries,
lots
of
of missionaries. So little groups of schools were set up, and a hospital of some sort was set up, wasn't it? Very much so.
Yes, very much so.
Yes.
But I think it's worth saying that the majority of the internees were Americans, so
Yes.
there's very much an American flavour.
Yes.
And Americans are particularly good at committees and organising things, and there was any amount of fun and games and stage activity and things to boost morale.
Orchestras were set up, weren't they? And
so there were many positives when you
yes.
bring a lot of people together. And the other thing, I'm just saying it while I think of it, it wasn't a static population. People passed through the camp and went, there was an overflow. And they called for volunteers from the camp to march to another place called Los Baños to start another camp. And they did that, and they set up a camp, and thousands of people went through. As many as 10,000 people, I'm quoting from the books I've read, passed through Santo Tomas in the 3 years we were there. But the population at any one time was between 3,000 and 4,000.
Yes.
So it was, and some were repatriated. The famous photographer Karl Maidans was repatriated to America.
Weren't they just the Americans who were repatriated?
Well,
I'm not sure.
I think
so.
probably yes. But it was very carefully chosen.
Yes.
But he was a remarkable man, a professional photographer for Life magazine, because he came back with General MacArthur when General MacArthur liberated us. So there he was, liberating his old camp.
And recognising quite a few people, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
Recognised him when he came back in with General MacArthur.
Yes. So there was quite an American feel about the camp.
Oh yes, I think so. And my parents had a lot of American friends after the war. But I mean, we children were reasonably well fed. I don't really remember being hungry till the very end. I was a very difficult eater, you can imagine, at 5, very picky with what I ate. And I remember my mother saying that after a very short time I would eat anything. And to this day I will eat just about anything, and I'm not good on waste. Because, you know, we did not waste anything. I mean, by the end we were eating potato peelings and things like that. We were very hungry. Occasionally when the Japanese saw us on our own, they would give us the odd sweet or something like that. but we had to eat it in front of them in case we took it back to our parents. We did have Red Cross parcels, didn't we?
Yes, we did. We did indeed.
They came in.
Occasional.
Very occasional, from the American and the British Red Cross. And my parents were very careful on how they opened them, you know, and opened a few tins at a time, and kept them for a rainy day, some of them, I think. And by the end, we were desperate, and that's when we were eating out of the tins that they were able to keep.
I wanted to find a little quote about the cats and dogs.
Yes,
Yes.
The Japanese commandant, this is right near the end. I'm quoting from my father's diary, which is this document here. I don't know if you can see that.
Yes, I see that, yes.
yeah.
And towards the end of it, I can't find the exact thing, the commandant decided that everyone was very hungry towards the end. And the commandant decided that the dogs in the camp should be rounded up and fed to the internees. When we said that there weren't enough dogs, he said then it should be limited to being fed to the children, which didn't go down very well, and I don't think it was ever carried out.
No.
But people were pretty hungry.
Of course, they ate everything. There weren't any other
Yes.
cows, pigs, anything was left by the end. They were all eaten, mostly by the Japanese, though, I
Yes.
think, by the end. But
But in our father's diary, he talks about, very specifically about eating parts of the banana trees. Towards the end, we're eating the roots of the banana trees, the stem of the banana trees, and
the flour.
and the bud. That was a great
yes.
treat. We kept the bud, which is as big as two fists like that, a red thing, and that was a great
But we
treat.
never actually got bananas, as far as I remember.
Pass,
you
I
know,
can't remember.
The ones that were grown. We had banana trees in the camp growing near our shack, didn't we? But,
Oh, we did, absolutely.
And other things were grown, because I remember Daddy was had to go off gardening, didn't he?
Yes.
For the camp. I mean,
the camp
one
gardens,
of his
yes.
things was to garden
Yes.
for the camp. Everybody had something to do. All the adults had a job of some sort, didn't they?
They were obliged to work. It
They
wasn't.
had to.
It wasn't
And he
for
was a
fun.
cleaner at one stage.
But his main job was cracking coconuts.
Yes, he
until
was.
recently, it's gone missing now, we had the tool Japanese provided him to open coconuts. And it was sort of like a long thing with a little hatchet on the side, and you crack. This is the coconut with the outer husk on it.
Wasn't it?
You would have to crack that, get your lever in, open it out, take off the outside,
Yeah, the husk. and
so
then-
you get down to the hard shell, and then crack the shell. And presumably the contents was used
Do you
for
know, I don't
for
even
camp
remember
use.
eating the coconuts
Yeah,
at
but
all.
what he particularly mentions in the diary, when eventually there weren't any more coconuts.
No, yes.
So,
They must have used them in the kitchen for.
So we had camp gardens somewhere, and he was detailed when the coconuts ran out to work in the camp gardens. But we also seemed to have our own little garden, because he
Yes.
would bring things in from there, and it would be things we don't know here, but things like tolinum and sort of chickweed and stuff like that.
We were eating just about anything.
And
that
and
grew.
and our mother was very
Yeah.
good at
Yeah.
at cooking. I mean, one had these little pottery cooking stoves.
Cooking stoves, yes, yes. She did all sorts of things. And things came through in parcels
Yeah.
that she used, didn't
But
she?
again, quoting from Dad's diary, he says there was a time when you needed permission from our leader in the camp to light a wood fire. I was just reading it this morning.
Yeah, yes.
So we were always trying to supplement.
We got food from we lined up every day to get food, and I think the children had a special kitchen. And then, we had extra food
Yes.
in the shanty that
I think they were
Mum
very
was
good to
able
children.
cook. Yes, until the end, when things, you know, we were very, very thin by the end, and our weight went right down.
I don't think we were bad. I think our parents were.
Parents were,
were
of
very
course.
bad.
They were far worse than we were.
But again, quoting the diary, George says that there was a very strict allocation for every person. You lined up and you got your food.
Yes, you got your...
And children got half that allocation.
Yes.
But sometimes, depending on how difficult the guards were feeling, it was 2 meals a day and sometimes 3, pre-arranged. And you would, my father talks of interminable queues.
Yeah,
And,
endless queues. But by the end it was down to 2 meals a day of just mush. He refers to mush, doesn't he? And
Yes.
I can't remember mush, but I must have eaten mush.
So I think, in short, the main difficulty was lack of decent food.
Yes.
And
I mean, milk, I think to start with, the children had a certain amount of milk, but that soon stopped.
But again, he says nicely in his diary that there were allocations of milk to the camp, which would have been buffalo milk, and the adults all agreed that it was for the children only.
Yes,
So there must have been a great many children in the camp.
Oh, I think there were, yes.
Certainly.
And of course, soon, I can't remember, soon after, they were allowed to get married. People were allowed to get married. Originally they weren't allowed to.
Right.
And then babies were born in camp, of course. And I think we kept up with 1 or 2. I was just remembering pets. I had a kitten towards the end of the camp. Where they got this kitten from, I don't know, but it must have been a birthday present or Christmas present, I think, something like that. And of course people were eating all the cats and there were very few left. So I wrote a label and on it wrote, "Please do not eat me," and tied it round the cat's neck. And with my mother went off to the various people who we knew who ate cats and said, "This is my kitten called Kinky, and please do not eat me." And that kitten survived the war. So that was one good thing anyway. I think that was the only... Oh, the other pets we had was we would go under the shanty with jars and collect the glowworms. Do you remember that?
Fireflies.
Fireflies
into jam jars, yes.
Yes, and they made quite a light when you collected quite a lot of them in a jar. But,
this business of going underneath the shanty was hilarious because a shanty it was made of packing cases basically. Imagine how thin the wood is. And we'd solemnly go underneath there when there was an air raid. I mean, as if that would make any difference. And sure enough, shrapnel did arrive uninvited into the camp, and there were injuries. But
there were an awful lot of spiders under there as well.
We survived. Yes.
There? Yeah.
But I don't think it was all doom and gloom. People have a habit of cheering up, and one of the books written about the bank is absolutely full of cartoons, often poking fun at our captors.
About the camp, yes.
Yes. And a lot,
there were a lot of
it slightly American humour, but one from the Japanese side serious, but from our side hilarious point, again from my father's diary, was that they had to sign a document promising that they would not escape, not try and escape. And this had to be signed with, I think, a signature or a thumbprint.
And a thumbprint.
And this had to be done for us too, the 2 little pipsqueaks.
And a baby.
Had to sign a document that we would not try and escape. So I think, again, it's worth mentioning for those who don't know about these things that this is a civilian camp. There was no obligation to try and escape. It's not like a prisoner of war camp where there is a certain daring do and obligation to try and escape. And in the course of the 3 years, 10 people did try and escape and 10 people were caught and 10 people were executed. But that's out of many thousands that were in the camp.
I suppose there were civilian men who felt they had to...
Apart from that, I think most of all the deaths were, my father refers to increased deaths towards the end through malnutrition,
yes.
mostly affecting the aged, was his words.
Well, I think suddenly when the Americans came in and we had all this food, people just ate, and all the most unsuitable food for,
Yes.
for stomachs that hadn't had a decent meal
That's right.
for years.
There were many fatalities.
And many fatalities from
after the
overeating
war.
or eating the wrong food. Our father was very ill towards the end, wasn't he?
Yes,
he had beriberi. I think it was beriberi.
Yes, he talks about the early stages of beriberi.
Beriberi, and he was confined to the
malnutrition.
shack, to the shanty because of malnutrition.
No, he was in bad shape.
Yes, but he was taken by the Americans soon after they arrived, and he was given the right food and the right
Yes, he went to hospital,
medicine.
yeah.
He went to a hospital.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he made a most fantastic recovery. And within a year after the war, he was playing golf again, and he lived to the ripe old age of 74.
73, yeah.
Considering what he'd been through, he did extremely well.
Yes.
Mum was fairly fit, but very, very thin, wasn't she, by the end?
Yes, they all
as we all were.
naturally lost a lot of weight.
Yes,
And then when the Americans did arrive, General MacArthur, I will return.
yes,
Fortunately, he did return.
did return, yeah.
And I think it should be said that we, as a family, owe our lives to the Americans, without a doubt. There
we
weren't
do.
enough Brits within the camp, or within, because there were other camps as well, to come back for, whereas MacArthur pride had been dented when he was expelled from, and he came back, and he made the decision to recapture Manila before other areas. He'd been told to recapture the Philippines methodically from east to west, and he said, no, all the action is in Luzon. I must get there first, otherwise they won't survive. So, as I say, his overlooking head office decisions actually probably saved us.
Yes. Yeah.
And when he did come, it was so surprising that the war was still going on all around the camp. I mean, the diary talks of daily air raids, not aimed at us, but aimed at the ports, the airfield, and this sort of thing. And the Japs, again, I'm quoting from this diary, were very angry that there were penalties if we even looked up to watch these battles in the air, and you were sent to the front gate and deprived of food for 24 hours if you were caught doing it. And he quotes two children were caught 5 minutes into curfew and sent to the gate for 24 hours without food. So they had ways of being unpleasant and unnecessarily unpleasant. But again, I say I think there was a lot of humour. You sort of manage.
We had roll call every day too, didn't we?
Roll call.
We had to stand
once a day
out.
or twice a day when they were feeling difficult.
Yes, if someone escaped, immediately there was a roll call, and you had to stand. And it was hot, wasn't it? It was very, very hot.
Well, again, towards the end, there was one particular day. He said, my father said in his diary, the roll call was particularly tough. They didn't allow any chairs. So you've got a lot of people towards the end who had great difficulty standing. And you stood for 20 minutes and you bowed, at his expression, at anything Japanese.
And a very low bow. It was right down to the waist, wasn't it?
We had instructions in bowing.
Yes.
And the commandant, right towards the end, when they knew they were going to lose, they still sent instructions on courtesy.
Bow, to the Japanese.
To the Japanese, because they were so kind as to look after us, and we owed them this as a mark of respect. So how different we all were. And we remained in the camp for 2 months after liberation, simply because the war was going on around us, and there was no plan to get people out. I think, fair enough, the Americans shipped out.
They shipped them out fairly quickly.
The American prisoners probably first.
Yes. But didn't Daddy have to stay because of the bank? The bank wouldn't let them leave.
I think there was
Straight away.
Yeah, but I think that was just.
I don't know
I'm
exactly.
not sure that delayed our departure.
But it was a good thing because he was getting fitter as well.
Yes.
And they were putting on weight, and we were all much fitter.
The bank was still operating during the war.
Yes, yes. And there was the other story we forgot, that at the beginning of the war, my father was a very keen photographer, and he had this camera called a Rolleicord, which we in fact...
This camera,
which we still have. And at the beginning of the war, he gave the camera and a bottle of whiskey to one of the Filipino shroffs in the bank and said, please would you look after this, thinking, oh, well, we'll only be away a couple of months. And sure enough, at the end of the war, this Filipino from the bank came back into the camp with Dad's camera, but no bottle of whiskey, of course. But the main thing was he had the camera, and he was able to get some films from the GIs once they came into the camp and we were liberated by them. Dad was able to get some films for this camera, and once he was fit enough, he was able to go out into Manila and walk around and take photographs of Manila, which was completely flattened, and amazing photographs, weren't they, of the ruins of various things like the cathedral and various government buildings.
Yes.
And of course he was able to take photographs of us and our shack, our shanty, wasn't he? I keep calling it a shack, of our shanty. So we're lucky enough to actually have photographs rather than just memories and drawings.
I want to recount another incident. I don't think I would mention their names, but the bank continued to operate during the war, although all the executives were interned. One couple who had Irish passports were not interned because Ireland was not part of the war effort, and they were extremely helpful to us and to other bank internees by buying things on request, and I don't think they physically brought them in, but they were brought in by
whoever. They were brought to the gate, weren't they?
Whoever.
Yes.
But dreadful story. They paid for it with their lives, and their two sons survived the war, but they did not. And so they had a worse war than we did, although we were interned and they were not.
Yes. So we felt
different ways of looking
lucky in a way. Yes.
Looking at things. I think it was a extraordinary and an interesting experience, but we as youngsters, and when I speak for myself, really couldn't compare it to anything else. I don't think we realised that it was any worse than anything else, because we had nothing to compare it to.
Our life went on, and in a different way. But you didn't know anything better or worse. And the climate was kind in a way, I suppose, by being very hot.
Yes.
And we grew out of our clothes, but we hardly needed clothes.
The funny thing is, I can't remember rainstorms, and of course Manila's famous for typhoons and heavy rains, and it's even referred to in my father's diary, but I don't remember that as
and we had these capes made of palm leaves, weren't they?
Nipa palms.
Nipa palms for when it was raining hard, and that's what the local people wore as well.
Yes.
And we wore not proper shoes, things called bakyas, weren't they?
Yes, sort of wooden sandals.
Wooden sandals, yes. Otherwise, we hardly wore anything. I think, you and I just wore a pair of underpants, really. But the ladies had things sent in, and I think, of course, the odd person had sewing machines. So people who were able to make clothes were probably able to get fabric sent in. Material sent in. And, were able to make clothes for each other, probably.
I think it brought out skills in many people. There are all sorts of people
there'd be
who made
dressmakers
do
and
you
like
remember, do you remember the beer mugs?
Yes,
made
that
of
was a lovely beer
bamboo?
mug.
Someone was making those and inscribing them with initials and STIC, Santo Tomas Internment Camp. So you made things to sell. People would artists would come and do pictures of your shack and sell them to you.
And,
they did portraits of us.
Because we had no photographs of us
Yes,
at that age.
that's right.
But it's lovely to have these paintings that, or portraits of, they were pastels, I think, basically.
Different things,
Different things
whatever
that,
the person had.
People had, so that was good.
Going back to something our parents said, I think one of the difficulties one overlooks from an adult point of view is that nobody had any idea how long we were going to be incarcerated for. And this played on the mind. If you are sent to prison, you have a finite sentence, and you can count the days and tick them off. You have hope at the end of the tunnel. I think in this case, think you're going in for 3 days and you come out 3 years later.
Yes.
It played on the minds of adults to the extent that some did not survive mentally. And even some bank men ended up in asylums at the end of the war.
So sad.
So there was a lot of mental stress.
Yes.
And you're fed negative propaganda. You're not going to win the war.
But I think one good thing about where we were so lucky to be there as a family.
Yeah.
Because had
Very
the
much
men
so.
been separated from the women, there would have been more worry, obviously, on their minds.
Yep.
And the other thing I seem to remember Dad saying, food was always on the mind, always food. And people would write out recipes, talk about restaurants, and remember all the food and the best places they'd been to before the war and what they were going to eat at the end of the war. And I think a lot of recipes were written out. And Daddy wrote out poems, didn't he? Scottish poems.
They were songs, yes.
Or songs,
I don't know why he wrote many, not his own invention. He was just checking his memory, I suspect.
Keeping his memory going, I think.
Yes.
And I think they did Scottish dancing in the evenings occasionally when they had the energy to start.
Well, this was early on,
at the early stages. And organised.
The morale was good early on.
Yes, thinking, of course, we were only going to be there a short time.
I can remember I can remember me, along with dozens of other people, on the stage singing "Roll Out the Barrel," all very American.
And we had roll call in the morning, didn't we? Wake up to.
No, you woke up to Reveille in the morning, and then they would play some. They being our committee.
Yeah.
We had our own committee. Americans, of course, and they would wake you up with a cheerful thing on the loudspeaker every morning.
Right. Was it pennies from heaven? Or
that's every day in the diary. It says what the Reveille was.
Yes.
But some of the accounts in the diary of air raids were going on around you all the time, with shrapnel landing in the camp, and we have some pieces here that landed right by us. And when you're living in a shanty made of leaves, you're not protected against red hot shrapnel arriving. And
some caught fire.
It was a lot of fun to see these planes flying over. You weren't allowed to look, but I mean you did. And I remember one strange childish thing. They said you can see the cannon fire, and I can see now little puffs of smoke in the air. And of course, in my mind, a cannon was a whacking great thing on a castle wall.
Yes, you'd think.
What the heck is a cannon fire doing up there? Yeah. I can remember as a child, couldn't work that out. What's this cannon fire they're talking about?
No, I don't remember that at all.
But the parents were very good in shielding us and giving us more than our fair share of food. And I think we had childhood diseases in camp, and probably have been rather sturdy as a result because of it.
Yes, we had the usual chicken pox, mumps, measles, I think we had. And I know I remember
very teeth ill. Out. Again mentioned in the diary Jim's first extraction.
Yes, I don't remember that. I was very ill at one stage because there was a census and it was sent out to my grandparents, wasn't it? And my name wasn't on it. There was just the parents and Jim, and my name wasn't on it. And I think at that period I'd been very ill, and the missionaries ran a sort of little hospital out of the camp, and the parents gave permission for me to go away, and it was at that stage the census was taken. So our grandparents were very worried when they received this without my name on it, weren't they?
That's right.
And there was correspondence, which we've still got.
We have the correspondence with the authorities.
Authorities trying to find out whether I was still alive.
That's right. And they got, over many months, got no satisfactory result. And I don't know where I got the story, but I can't have invented it, because someone said, have you tried the Catholic Church? We are not Catholics. And to our grandparents, and the grandparents duly wrote to whoever in the Catholic authority.
Yes.
And after some months, they got a reply saying, we can confirm Miss Judy Stewart is alive and well.
Yeah.
And it made one realise that the Catholics had people on both sides of the wire.
Yes.
And their network of information was remarkable.
Well, of course, yes, there were a lot of Catholics in Manila, weren't
Yeah,
there?
but I mean,
The
you had
Filipinos
Japanese Catholics too,
Yes,
is
as
what
well.
is what I mean.
Yes. Yes.
So it was confirmed that Judy was alive and well.
Well, so that was
a curious little incident.
curious
wasn't it?
incident.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um,
And we seem to have health checkups every now and again. Just
Yes.
reading the diary. Daddy would.
he was forever weighing us. He mentions,
Where he weighed
mentions
us,
the
I
weight.
don't know, weight of all of us,
Yes.
and how we deteriorated.
But the conditions varied very
Yes.
much. Again, I'm quoting the diary. When it appeared the Americans were making advances, they were tougher on us and making life more
much
difficult.
more so. Yes.
And more strict and
Yeah.
more
Less food and
roll calls
more-
and less
yes.
food. It went from 3 meals to 2
Yeah.
meals a day. So you knew when they were angry.
And then I was thinking towards the end, when the Americans came in, Dad was too ill to go to the gates. We heard
Yes.
this great cheering, didn't we?
Yes.
And everybody went to the main building. And Mum took us.
A tank literally came through
the front
wire,
gate, didn't
through
it?
the wire,
Yes.
and knocked everything down.
With GIs all over.
Yeah.
And they were handing out chocolates
we
and
had
sweets.
we had
and
chocolate within 1 hour of
another
their
of them arriving.
arrival.
Yes. Yes, handing out.
Yeah.
And we went back and took it to Dad, who wasn't fit enough to
Yeah.
come. And then, of course, 2 days later,
Well, that's when this.
I think General MacArthur came in, wasn't it? And it wasn't that when you picked up
yes,
that shrapnel?
We were liberated on the 3rd of February, 1945,
Yes.
and MacArthur came on the 7th of February, 1945. And my dad says in the diary, and Joy, my mother, and Judy and Jim saw him. We didn't
Yeah.
meet him, but saw him.
Saw
I mean,
him. Yeah,
thousands
that was
of
the
people.
big thing to see him.
And many years later, I was working in New York in the year MacArthur died.
Oh, right. Yeah.
1964, I think I'm right to say. And I went to his lying in state. So,
Yes, that was.
yeah.
I hadn't
that was-
realised that come full circle.
yeah, that was
then.
just coincidence. yeah.
Yes, yes.
And I've since been back to the site of the camp, to Manila,
Yes,
in
you
the year
did.
2010. And very interesting it was. I could remember exactly where our shanty was relative to the main building. Yeah.
Ah, yes.
And I went into the main building and spoke to the librarian and asked what. There are some plaques there saying the number of people that were incarcerated there and a little bit about the history. But the young lady I was speaking to said, "Oh, you're welcome back next year. We're celebrating 400 years."
400 years. Wasn't it?
But I didn't go back. And then I was sent a publication of their 400th anniversary, and there was no mention at all of it ever being a camp for 4 years.
Extraordinary.
So
That was wiped
I
out.
think clearly they were a little embarrassed by
Yeah.
it being taken over during the war years.
Yeah, well,
But just out of amusement, to show there is humour in situations, we were all given a certificate, which we have here, a beautifully made certificate with little comic Japanese characters, awarding us a praise for various things. And my highest praise was for trying to grow over
Yes,
4
that's
years.
right, trying to grow. And there you were at 3 or 4 years old.
So it shows that there was humour that sort of came through everything.
Yes, yes.
And I think that's important for morale. You can always see the negatives of everything,
Yes,
but
but
it
You had
helps
to
you
think
get
there
through
must have
with the
been many
positives.
funny
Yes.
sides as well.
Yes.
But I don't remember a lot of them myself.
So war came to an end, essentially.
Yes.
Yes.
You were in the camp for a while after the end of the war until you could be...
2 months, almost
2
exactly.
months
That's
nearly,
right.
yes, yes.
And what happened then?
We were put onto an American ship called the Admiral Eberly to San Francisco, I think it was.
It was
Is
sort of
that
San
right?
Diego.
San Diego.
It was some other
whatever.
name, but it's near San Diego,
Near
a little
San
bit further
Diego.
south, yes.
And
With, I believe, 7,000 people. I don't
yeah,
know.
and there were a lot,
I
weren't
didn't even
there?
get
But I don't
7,000.
think we were all from the camp. I
No,
don't know.
well, there were many other camps by then.
That's right.
Los
Other
Baños
camps
had
as
been
well.
liberated, Bilibid had been liberated. So
And
there
we
were other
set
camps.
sail and ended up in, Los Angeles or whatever it was called. And I remember one incident when Father went into a bank, obviously to get some money there. And you and I just sat down on the ground, cross-legged, as we always did. You know, we weren't used to
Yes.
chairs and things. And I think the parents were a wee bit embarrassed about that because you didn't do that in America. But we soon learnt. And of course, we hadn't got any clothes, suitable clothes for coming back. And that was all given to us by the American Red Cross. And I think we had some rather strange clothes. And I was given 2 dolls, 2 small dolls, which I've still got today, I hope. And I cherished those for a long time because it was something I hadn't had. And we were then put on a train.
But just before that,
Oh, yes.
I remember
What
the
do you
curious
remember?
thing, my father, who was very bald, pretty
Oh, yes.
bald, had a haircut and was outraged to pay the full price for a haircut when he had so little
When
hair.
he had just a
So-
halo of hair.
So the
I'd forgotten that.
Scot was only just below the surface.
Yes, yes. Presumably Mummy had a haircut as well,
Yeah.
but first professional
And then we
one,
were put on
probably.
that train.
This
to-
train.
with other refugees.
It was all refugees
Yeah,
on the train.
to go right across.
And we went to Halifax, Nova Scotia, so it was a week on this train. And every now and again the train would go into a siding to let the main trains go. And you got off once. In fact, several of us got off. We got
Yes,
bored with
yes.
this train, didn't we?
Yeah.
And started sort of playing in the prairies. And there would be a whistle. And we all rushed like mad. All the mothers rushed around making sure the children were back on the train. And off we'd go again. And then we got to St John's, Halifax, Nova
Halifax,
Scotia, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Where we got onto another ship, and I cannot remember the name of that one. And we set sail for Liverpool.
Yeah. And I think the war was still on.
Well, it was May.
Well, we came back.
May 1945, wasn't it?
Well, we came back in a convoy.
Yes.
That ship.
And
And just to add to the excitement, when we arrived at Liverpool, the ship had caught fire.
caught fire. The Mail had caught fire.
The mail, and so we were met by
Yes,
fire
by
engines.
Fire engines and water spewing forth
Yes,
from
yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and then we went to...
So that was my first step into Britain.
Yes, in Liverpool docks.
Having been
yes.
born in the Philippines.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we went to stay with some cousins because we hadn't got a home. We went to stay with some cousins who kindly had us for a bit, and then grandparents. And my father was given a year's leave, as far as I remember, and he was still fairly unwell, and he put on weight well, and then he was posted to Hong Kong.
Shanghai.
Oh, Shanghai, sorry, yes, Shanghai. So 1946, we went to Shanghai.
And he went the whole way by flying
By
boat.
flying boat, wasn't it? Yes.
Took 1 week, and he said that was the way to travel.
Travel in those days, yes.
You flew only in daylight hours. You landed, put on
Yes.
your dinner jacket and went to the best hotel,
hotel,
slept in
yeah.
a bed, and then hopped back on the plane.
It sounds quite literally, doesn't
Yes.
it? And
So our first schooling,
really was Shanghai.
yeah.
Yes, Shanghai British School.
Yep, where mum was a teacher.
She taught for a bit, yes. And then there were problems, obviously, in China at that time. This was end of 1946, 47.
We left in 48, and
Yeah.
everyone had to be out by 49.
And we went down to Hong Kong then by sea, didn't we? We went
Yeah.
on a ship down to Hong Kong. And
We were at school in Hong Kong.
we were at school in Hong Kong. I was
Different schools. I was at the
at
Peak School.
KG5, you were
Yep.
at the Peak School. And we only had a short time there because they
Yeah.
came on leave in 1949.
Yeah, and then that's when we were brought home for schooling.
They came on leave and we were both left at boarding school then.
Yes.
And of course, in those days, we only saw our parents in the summer holidays once a year. So that wasn't ideal, but it was the way it was. And in fact, it was better than my mother. She'd been left. Her parents were in Shanghai. And she was left at the same school that I'd been at, that I was at. And she didn't see her parents for 5 years. So we were lucky to see
Yeah.
them, you know, once
a year.
every year.
Yeah.
And we had great holidays in Bombay. They were in Bombay then,
Yeah,
weren't
yes, they were very good.
they? Yes.
Very nice.
And so we were lucky at the end of our holidays to come back to school and brag a bit that we'd been to India for our holidays. It was the only good thing. But, you know, we knew we weren't going to see the parents for
Yeah,
another year, sadly.
yeah.
I mean, you were at Sherborne, weren't you, Jim?
Latterly, I was at a
Latterly,
prep
yes.
school before that.
Yes.
Yes. Where was that?
In Sussex. It doesn't exist today. It was called Borzell.
Borzell.
It was, I think, 80 odd boys.
But you were sent there primarily because I was at Battle Abbey
down the road.
down the road, and the parents wanted us
Yes.
to be within reach because of their friends and our relations collecting us on the holidays when we weren't going out to India, wasn't it? Yes, yes. So yes, I was at Battle for 5 years. Yes.
And then schooling came to an end. What happened after that?
What happened
You went
after that?
to India for a year with the parents.
decided, or the parents decided, it'd be a good idea for me to get to know them again. So I went out to India because we really didn't know them properly, only just spending a few weeks in the summer holidays with them and the odd leave when they came on leave. So I went out to India and had a great time in Bombay, travelling around, and I did a secretarial course and was able to travel up to Kashmir and places like that with friends. And then I came back to London after a year, 1956, when my father retired from the Far East, didn't he? And he was posted to London, and I came back to London and got a job there. And after a few years, I got itchy feet again, and I went to work in Hong Kong with the Hong Kong Bank. I travelled out on a cargo boat with a friend, and we took 6 weeks to get to Hong Kong. But on the way, it was lucky that the ship stopped in Manila. So I stayed with friends in Manila, and they were able to take me and show me Santo Tomas as it was in 1960. So that brought back memories for me. And then I worked in Hong Kong for 2 years. And then back to London, where I joined the War Office, as it was called then, and they posted me out to Nairobi. But I had a funny interview with them because, you know, one was called in, where would one like to go and work? And I said, well, I've been born and brought up in the Far East, and I would like to go back to the Far East again, but I'd never been to Africa, and I really wasn't interested in Africa at all. Well, of course, I was posted to Nairobi, where I had a great time, and where I met my husband. So I had 2 years there, and in 1966 came back to London.
Yes.
And was married a year later. I think, yes, back then, wasn't it? Yes, I'm bad at years. While you
I left school,
you were
I would say
7.
early by most standards, before A-levels, after O-levels. Aged, I suppose, 17 and
I
a
think
half,
you were,
something
yeah.
like that. And tried my hand at accounting in London, which I didn't take to at all. It was mutual. Jim and debits and credits don't go together.
Don't go together, yeah.
And I eventually, when my father retired, joined the Hong Kong Bank. In those days, executive joined in London, where you took exams in banking, and then you are sent to the Far East. In those days, head office was in Hong Kong.
That's right, yes.
But if you had passed your exams and you were not ready, they weren't ready to receive you in Hong Kong because they only wanted a finite number of people, you were sent to a posting for sort of practice. And I was sent to New York. So I had a year in New York, which was wonderful. With my sort of American upbringing in the Philippines, it was deja vu slightly and very enjoyable. No responsibility. The more junior you are, the more fun you have because you work quite hard, but no responsibility. After a year in New York, back to London, and then my turn came to go to the Far East. And unusually, by our standards, I didn't go to Hong Kong, which was head office. I was posted to Singapore. So my first tour of 4 years, without a break, I might say, was in Singapore, which I loved, absolutely loved. And I think it's worth stressing that people like us were in the Far East because we really wanted to be. It was by no means a hardship posting. So the fact that we were spoilt with wonderful quarters to live in and reasonable salaries was a total bonus on top of actually being somewhere you wanted to be. And you embraced it and you tried to learn the language and you were rewarded if you passed exams in the local language, this sort of thing. And being the Hong Kong Bank head office is Hong Kong, you go on leave. I had 8 months leave. You had 4 years on and a tour and 8 months leave. Then I was posted to Hong Kong after that, 2 tours in Hong Kong, and then off around the world. I was posted to Brunei, to Bangkok, to
Yes, where else did you go?
Stockholm, Frankfurt.
Frankfurt, yeah.
I've missed out one.
London, yes, where else?
But
You had a
lot of
place.
postings.
Yeah.
Then the wheel goes full circle and head office moves back to London in 1997 in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And the bank's purchase of Midland Bank, and a lot of executives came back, and I was one of those.
And
then I retired.
Yeah.
And I've been happy ever after.
And still travelling the world.
Yes.
We can't stop him. He's always away. Yes.
I know I asked this question before the interview, but I'll ask it again because and that is whether you think that your early upbringing in a Philippine internment camp under the Japanese had any influence on your later lives.
Well, I don't think it really did. The only thing, it sounds silly, is I've always had bad teeth, and I'm sure that goes back to, you know, the lack of all the things, the calcium and all the rest of it when one was a child. In fact, I always thought that by now, in 81, I would have false teeth, but I haven't. I know my parents had problems with their teeth, but otherwise, I'm afraid I don't think it has. Not me, at any rate.
Yes,
Has it?
no,
What do you
I
think?
don't think so. And psychologically, I don't think it was a
No, I
problem.
don't think-
And even our father was very understanding
Yes.
because he went back to Japan after the war with the first trade mission from England,
Yes.
led by some
I'm sure he didn't find it easy.
senior dignitary.
Yes.
And he was extremely forgiving to the extent he said he couldn't compare the courtesy that he met in Japan with the treatment we had. And I think the war brings out the worst in everybody, and I'm sure our internment camps for enemy aliens was not sunshine and roses either.
Yeah, I'm sure they weren't.
No,
but we wrote the history, so I mean...
yes.
Okay, just to finish up, because I think we're probably getting close to towards the end of the interview, unless you've got other things you want to talk about. Well, thinking about how you might, I mean, we're living through quite interesting times at the moment, I think, in many ways. What would based on your own experience in life, what would your advice be to younger people today? If you were to give any sort of good, sound advice, what might it be? This is the killer question.
That's a killer question.
The killer question, yeah.
I don't have younger people I'm responsible for. You have children and grandchildren.
Yes, I just feel that, I don't know, take life as it comes, and I haven't any great advice at all.
But I think the modern tendency for the young to travel and learn languages is a great breaker down of barriers. I think we're going to understand each other much better by interacting. In those days, travel was complicated. It was considered exotic to go to the Far East. Now, you go to the Far East for a week's holiday.
Yes, a week's holiday or a weekend, practically.
I think one's less likely to go to war with people that
and of course, we didn't learn the language.
Appreciate.
Yes. We never really.
That's hardly advice,
yes.
but I think the tendency now is intermarriage. I mean, mixed race marriages are so common now. It was almost taboo in those days.
Oh yes, it was, wasn't it?
So the closer we get, the less likely we are to have a conflict.
Yes,
yes.
It's just nothing to do with that at all. I think my parents, how they met, and their wedding was worth recording because it was so unusual and just would not happen today. They met when they were both in Shanghai. And
my mother was born in Shanghai.
My mother was born in Shanghai and her parents were there. And like me, after school, she went out to Shanghai to stay with her parents, and she met my father. And then she came back to England, and he had to do his 2 years, I think, before he came on leave. And then they met up when he came on leave. And they got engaged. But in those days, the bank insisted on the young men doing 10 years service in the Far East before they could get married. And my father went back to Hong Kong this time to do another 5-year stint. And Mummy worked in England. She was a matron at a school, I think.
Yep.
And they were engaged, and that, life went on. And suddenly the bank relented and decided that my father could get married after 3 years, so he had another 2 years to do. So a wedding was arranged. He was not allowed to come back to England for the wedding. It had to be in Hong Kong. So he arranged his wedding. He got his 2 old girlfriends to be bridesmaids to my mother, who had never met them, and he had a couple who had 2 lovely little girls, and they were little bridesmaids. The bank manager was going to...
The famous Sir Vanderlei Greyburn.
Sir Vanderlei Greyburn gave my mother away. So Mummy set sail on a ship, taking probably, a good 6 weeks to get to Hong Kong, with a lot of other young ladies who were getting off at different ports. Some were supposed to be going to Hong Kong, but some met men on board and would get off at Colombo instead of going on to Hong Kong or Singapore or wherever. So Mummy eventually got to Hong Kong on the Thursday, and she was married on the Saturday, not knowing a soul at her wedding and not having seen her future husband for over 3 years. And I think it's an amazing thing to have achieved. And they had the most happy marriage, didn't they? They, you know, really was a great love match. But if you mention this to anyone today, they can't believe it, really.
I often wonder if they would have had more children if the war hadn't intervened.
Well,
and
yes, you
never
just
thought
don't
of that.
know. I hadn't thought about that, yes. No, I think they possibly stuck at 2. It's enough.
I think you said they were married in St John's Cathedral.
That's
They were,
right,
indeed.
they were,
Yes,
sorry,
yes,
yes,
indeed, yes, that's
in
right.
Hong Kong, at
Yes.
St John's Cathedral, yes. Yes. And I remember when I lived there, I lived at, when I worked in Hong Kong, I lived very near at a place called the Helena May.
I know the name, yes.
Does that
yes.
ring a bell?
Yes, it does, yes. Yes,
It
indeed.
was equivalent to a sort of YWCA
Yes, yes,
at
yes.
near the Peak Tram.
Yes,
Yes. So that I remember walking through the grounds a lot of the cathedral, to and from work, I think it was. Yeah.
Talking about their wedding, the reception for the wedding
yes,
was
yes.
in the banking hall of the new Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, which had just been built. This was 1936.
Yes,
About 6 banks ago.
yes.
About 68 banks
Yes,
ago.
yes.
But it was a wonder of construction at the time. It was the tallest building in Asia at 10 floors. It had a squash court on the top floor, which was remarkable in
I've
itself.
forgotten that, yeah. And a flat.
And a flat, and where I subsequently lived.
No, you did.
And it was remarkable for another feature. The banking hall was air conditioned, and air conditioning was completely new. And to be able to air condition this vast volume space
Yeah.
was considered amazing. People just came in to
Yeah.
look. It was a remarkable
Yes, it
building
was.
in many stages. And this was replaced many years later by what is there now. But
And when I was born in 1937 in Hong Kong, Dad was working on telegrams.
that's right, living in the
Because
flat.
he was on telegrams, he had to live in this flat at the top of the bank. So that was my first home, this flat. And was it Sir Arthur Morse at that stage?
Probably.
I think so. Decided that it wasn't a suitable home for a baby. So they were given a flat somewhere. So I know they didn't last long in that, and he probably had to change his job from telegrams.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't really a very suitable home for a baby, was it?
I lived in the same flat
You
some
lived in the-
30 years later
as a bachelor
as the
and-
telegrams man.
Yes, yes.
You had to be on site, and
Yes,
your
as
staff worked on
telegrams.
shifts,
Yes.
but you had to be on site.
Right, well, I think we're probably just about there, aren't we?
Yes.
Yes, well, I
Inevitably,
think
we'll
so.
think of things once you've
Yes,
gone.
once you've gone.
Well,
but,
that always happens, unfortunately.
yes.
But
Thank you.
thank you very, very
Yeah.
much indeed.